Hello, welcome to Love and Flowers and You with Dr. Jennifer Love in Los Angeles. And we have Dr. Michelle Flowers in Chicago. And I'm international journalist Marina Hutchinson in Atlanta. And Michelle, let's start with the topic of the week and why we chose it.
And we decided to talk about women that have inspired us as we were growing up. And in my house, we had these things called value tales. And I had no idea about it at the time. This isn't even my favorite one. I have a collection of my favorite women, but they look like this. And there was the value of determination was the story of Helen Keller. And that was my favorite one. And I think it was one of the most brilliant things that my mother did without even knowing she was doing it. Because I had all these phenomenal female role models. The story of Helen Keller was there. The story of Nellie Bly was there. The story of Eleanor Roosevelt was there. And I would read about these women, and I really didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back, I understand that they were such a powerful influence on my life.
Well, that's interesting because you hadn't told me about that before the show, but I had those same books in my house too. So let's talk with you, Jennifer, and tell us who's the woman that you chose to speak about for this show.
As usual, I went through a very circuitous thought process and trying to figure out who I really wanted to talk about. I was getting ready yesterday and this Alanis Morissette song came on and I was remembering like the 90s and how progressive she was and how her lyrics put out, decades before the Me Too movement, she was addressing things that were really uncomfortable for people to talk about at the time. And I was thinking about her. I was thinking about how probably for the first half dozen or so podcasts we did, I sat literally with my Michelle Obama book, like next to me, next to my computer to kind of look at her and kind of calm myself down. Because that book was just really inspiring to me. And I was just struggling to find someone brilliant to talk about. And I texted my best friend and texted my mom and they were talking about kind of the typical people we think about, RBG and Jane Goodall, who was recently nominated, I think, for a Nobel Peace Prize. And I was thinking about women I've met who work for the UN, for human rights and going through it. And when I texted my mom, it was really interesting because she was talking about her grandmother, so my great-grandmothers, her grandmother Kern and her grandmother Love, and how they affected her life. And she said something to me, and I pulled up the text, and she loved, so these are women, we're going back to the 1800s, not to date my mother or myself, but she said they were real women in my life who survived and modeled grace during a very challenging period of time for women. And she went on to say, there are many women who have sacrificed for all of us and whose destinies have placed them in prominence in history, and to them we owe much gratitude. But the biggest impact on who I am has been women close to me. And I loved that because, it got me thinking, is inspiration really always grand or is it ordinary?
That is so on point. And in fact, when we discussed about choosing women, I thought, well, there's so many amazing women. But like you, I thought, some of the most amazing examples for me were the women that are close to me, my mother and my grandmother. Michelle, who did you choose as a woman?
I didn't choose one. I chose 12, which is totally like me as well. But, I was thinking about my mother, both of my grandmothers who modeled totally different things. This whole group of amazing women friends I have that inspire me every day. And I wasn't a girl who had a lot of girlfriends when I was young. I didn't have really a girlfriend group. And so I always got along with boys better, but I didn't think that I would have the group of women friends that I have now. And I'm so grateful for all of them. I was texting them all yesterday and thinking, wow, I'm so lucky.
When we discussed the topic, I thought, well, if I had to choose a woman, there were lots, but a woman that I don't know, but I think I really admire, of many women, because there's just so many women that I admire. But I don't know how many of you have heard, you may have heard of her, Sarah Blakely. She's actually from Atlanta. And if you've not heard of her, have you heard of her?
No.
Okay. You've heard of Spanx.
Yes, I knew the name, but I
Yes.
didn't know why.
She is the founder of Spanx, and she's a billionaire now. She was mentioned in a magazine as the one top 100 most influential people in the world. And it's amazing to think that she founded Spanx in 2012, and now that, she's so awesome. But what I always loved about her story that I think is a great thing to share with everyone is the fact that something I think her father had told her, that if you're not failing at something, then you're not trying hard enough. And so that's why I wanted to talk about her, because one, she had this meteoric rise because of this idea that many people didn't believe in, and she kind of had to push through on her own, and how she was so successful by following her gut. And that's why I thought she was a story that, was worth sharing.
Maybe literally following her gut, at least following our guts. I love that. It's just this week, a colleague and I were talking about, was talking about something that happened in my office. And, I always talk about this ripple effect that can be positive or negative. And someone had set off a very negative ripple effect that, even I, the lofty psychiatrist, got caught up in and was just miserable over it for several weeks. And we were talking about it, and he mentioned something about Mother Teresa. And he said, this is going to sound very non-diplomatic, but he said, I was reading about the journalist, one of the journalists who covered her entire life in India, an Indian journalist, and covered the work that she did. And he said, there are a number of counts that Mother Teresa was kind of a bitch. And my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, are you kidding me? I have her book on my shelf. I'm like, what are you talking about? This woman took care of lepers. I was like, so I thought, well, Marina says everyone Googles everything. So I literally Googled, was Mother Teresa a bitch? And tons of stuff came up online, and I was really surprised. But it kind of hit me at that point. You actually don't have to be on a pedestal to inspire people. I actually love her more if she was a bitch because she still gave of herself, and she still had this, she was an inspiration to a billion people of how to give of yourself. And to me, it really kind of set me thinking along the lines of, I don't have to be perfect. Who I am now is enough to inspire someone.
Yeah, and that is such an important point to make about how who we are now is awesome as it is, and inspirational. And I think most women forget that, and women of all ranks, mothers, doctors, just everybody. I think so many of us just always feel we have to be so much more when what we are is already so awesome. Now, Michelle, I'm curious, you said you had 12 women. I want to hear some more of the dozen.
Well, I want to touch on something, though, about this Mother Teresa thing, because I think it's important about, was she a bitch? I'm not a huge fan of the word, but what is that? Women are much more likely to be labeled as bitchy or bossy if they're taking a leadership role. And so, one of the questions I have is, and so maybe she was cranky sometimes. Who isn't? One of the TED Talks that I sent out yesterday was from a TED Talk, TED Women. I think it was in 2018, but it was the power of women's anger. And I think, anger or bitchiness is an emotion that is seen as not feminine and something that you gets taken away from you, but it's something that's so powerful. And when my daughter, who is actually one of the 12, she is a young woman who I totally admire, who has overcome fear and, stepped out of her comfort zone many, many times to grow. All three of my daughters, actually. But when she first got her period, she said to me, Mom, I just feel this rage and I don't even know what it's about. And it occurred to me for the first time, because she's very petite, maybe it sort of makes evolutionary sense too, because how is this small person going to defend a child? Now she's at the point where she could have a child. Well, rage would be helpful in that situation. So maybe, with your childbearing years comes rage, which is quite useful in many situations.
And so it's so interesting you brought that up, because that actually ended up being part of the conversation that I had with my colleague when we were talking about Mother Teresa and the dynamics oftentimes amongst women, how we are the hardest on each other. And when a woman is strong, when a woman has principles and stands up for them, and this happened to me recently, you get labeled as being a troublemaker, or people call you a bitch or say bad things about you. And I had reacted to something that was unethical, but had like some negative gossip about me behind my back that was actually really hurtful. And so it's interesting how the differences, to kind of stop and reflect this month about the differences between men and women. And it's the things that are kind of our thoughts that are behind the scenes, and that we don't really talk about that much, that really guide. And we need to talk about our kind of those biases that are inherent within us. So when we catch ourselves thinking, well, how that person's really a bitch, to go, well, wait, is she really? Or is she just, having a characteristic now that is typically seen as masculine? And if she were a man doing what she's doing now, would I be having the same thought? That's where we start learning and growing.
And that was exactly my first thought when you mentioned, that people had said she was a bitch. I thought, well, a man is authoritative and he has leadership skills. And was she showing authority and leadership skills, and then because she's a woman she turned into a bitch because she said no, that we shouldn't be doing that, or we should be doing that? So I right away, that's the first thing that came to me. Is that the translation of authoritative and leadership for a man, that for some women then becomes, well, she's a bitch because she wants to do things her way?
I mean, I actually got fired from a volunteer in high school. I was part of the athletic training staff, and they were doing something, and I had this wonderful experience of having gone to athletic trainer camp the year before, so I knew everything. But there was something that was happening that I was like, I think we could do this more efficiently. And, the athletic trainer who was in charge was like, you're out of here. I'm sick of your feedback. And I was like, oh, okay. And years later, I don't know, it was at least 15 years later, I think I was giving a talk at the Illinois State Trainers Association about depression in athletes, and he was there, and he came up to me, and he with tears in his eyes, and he was like, I am so sorry. You had this potential and this intellect, and I didn't know what to do with you at the time, and it's on me, and I just want to tell you how sorry I am that I didn't realize what a gift you had.
That's a great story. That's so wonderful that somebody recognizes that they were wrong.
Yeah, it was a really powerful moment, because you leave those moments as a 15-year-old girl thinking, oh, well, there's something's wrong with me. I guess I better shut this down.
Yeah, in fact, actually, there was one woman who was the head of a major studio, and recently in France, when we had been speaking, and she was speaking to a group of women, she said that often she would not speak at the table, and then a man would say what she was going to say, and it was, oh, so great. So that was one of her tips and advice I thought that was very useful, to use your voice and not be afraid to speak up. And in your example, Michelle, you spoke up and you were shot down, and that's a problem, but great that it all came full circle and you were told, hey, I was wrong. I shouldn't have shot you down. I think, it's very important that we speak up and we recognize that our voice is important. And that's exactly what you are doing, Jennifer, by doing this show. Finally speaking up and sharing your voice with the world.
Finally.
Well, and I should also say that, I currently have a male boss who said to me, I've given him some feedback, and now I got into the habit of, sort of saying, can I really talk about this? Do I have permission to tell you what I really think? And and I got the feedback from him, which was, I know that no matter what I say, you're going to tell me the truth. You're going to speak freely. And it's one of the things that I love and appreciate about you.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what you have to be. But unfortunately, some women don't feel the strength to do that, and we often get pushed down. So, Jennifer, any other women on your list you want to talk about?
You know, Michelle's story about what happened when she was 15 is really interesting because, you know, I think how we interact with young women, young girls, really can have an effect on them. And I was thinking about, you know, one of the teachers I had in ninth grade who told me I was smart. And she took me from the English class she taught and put me into the honors English for the rest of high school and put me on a different track. And I had another teacher who was taking an advanced science course. And he was actually pretty sexist. And so I had one teacher kind of telling me I was smart, and I had that voice in my head that I was like, it was so foreign to me, like I am and I can do things. And then I had this other voice of women shouldn't be doctors, they should be nurses. And you know, it's so crazy how much louder his negative voice was than her positive voice. And I actually started college as a nursing major. And because when I was thinking about what women have actually affected me, it was my nursing anatomy professor who kept saying to me, Jennifer, go to medical school. Your questions that you keep bringing to me aren't answered in the nursing curriculum. They're answered in the med school curriculum. You need to go there. And I was just like, no way, just answer my questions. I'm just curious. I don't want to go to med school, you know, and she was really instrumental in kind of moving me in that direction too. But it's so interesting how some voices can really be louder than others. And so I think that when we have something uplifting to say, and when we have something positive to say to a young person especially, we need to do that, because sometimes it takes multiple voices, multiple people coming through before something can actually sink into this thick skull and we start believing it's over the negative.
That's another great story that you share, because that is so true. The importance of positive input from people, and I always like to be positive to people, but I recognize that the negative that people tell us just kind of sears into our brain, and it must be something you guys maybe have studied about how, you know, do negative thoughts or negative input, do they just stick better than when somebody tells you you're beautiful or somebody tells you you look great and you don't believe them right away?
Yeah.
Right.
And it makes sense, right? Because the brain is sort of wired to protect you, and anything that hurts you, whether it's emotional or physical, your brain is going to hold on to and say, stay away from things that are like this. And it holds it really tight. And some people hold it tighter than others. There are definitely people who have gotten around this mechanism somehow, and they don't hold those memories, those negative memories. But I would say that they're far more rare than those of us who do. But what I love about the story that Jennifer told is that this woman is looking at her. And I had a similar woman in college when I was trying to decide what to do. And she's saying, you know, the questions that you're asking are not answered here. It's not that women shouldn't be a nurse, because some women are fantastic nurses. And it's not that women should need to be doctors instead of nurses. It's, I see you, and what the questions you're asking are going to be answered in medical school. And I had both women and men in my life who were able to do that for me and say, here's what I hear you saying, and here's where I think your talents are, and this is the direction that you might want to think about heading. Which is
more accomplishment that you actually achieved it, that you guys thought that maybe you weren't at the level of being a doctor, and yet you pushed through and you did it.
I never thought about being a doctor. I loved school, and I always wanted to be a teacher. But I graduated with a degree in biology, and it was my academic counselor who said, you know, you have really outstanding academics, and you're going to have to go to school now anyway. You can teach if you go to medical school, and lots of other opportunities will open up to you, and you seem to love science, so maybe you want to head that direction. And I did.
So already two amazing women right here with me. So let's talk about any more women we want to throw into the conversation before we run out of time.
My childhood hero, and the value tale that I probably read the most was that of Helen Keller. And her value tale is about the story of determination. And I remember as a girl, just the pictures, I can still see them in my brain. And hearing that story of, here's a girl whose sight is taken from her and she doesn't have language. And it was Anne Sullivan. So it's actually the story of two women, right? It's Anne Sullivan who gives her a voice. And maybe that's, even as I'm thinking about it right now, getting goosebumps, the more important part is that it's the power of women working together, and being there and seeing each other. And then she gave her sight and she gave her a voice. And I just think that no matter what's happening, there is this power within us that once we tap into, we're unstoppable.
You never really know. You never know what that influence is going to be. Anne Sullivan probably thought working with Helen Keller was a lost cause for quite some time. And she was determined and it paid off. But when women do things, they don't always have us in mind. Michelle Obama, as much as I love her, has no idea I exist and had no idea that I would put her book next to me. Starting a podcast I was terrified to start. And when I look at now, like who's announcing candidacy for presidency in 2020. Did Hillary Clinton have any idea? And there were those before her too. Elizabeth Dole ran for president years ago. Did they know that they had kind of hit the ceiling? And now look how many women are out there. And I think they've actually broken through, and we'll see what happens. But it's now a much more common thing. And so when we just never know how inspiring the things that we say or do can be to other people.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Think of someone to inspire. I think whoever you are today, as you are in this moment, you can be a vessel of inspiration.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think for mothers who are raising daughters and raising sons, it's important to have these stories of women. One of my group of doctor friends pointed out to me, she's like, do you know that all the holidays our kids get off of from school are about men? President's Day is about men. Good Friday is about a man. Christmas is about a man. These stories are about men. And so I think that it's important to have these day-to-day, like you were saying, Jennifer. It's not, pick one woman who's going to inspire you, but just integrate these stories into your day-to-day life. The value tales are a great option. There's a book called, I think it's called The Book of Rebel Girls. That's a bestseller right now. And it's just short stories of inspiring women. And I think we'll know we're successful when we don't have to talk about having International Women's Day, that it's just, okay, we're here.
Yes, so true. And it's still a long road to go, but thank you both for being here today from your busy schedules and sharing all your great wisdom.
And if you have any questions on this topic or others you want answers or possible solutions for, email us at loveandflowersandyou@gmail.com. So it is all spelled out. Love, Love, and AND, flowers, and you@gmail.com. loveandflowersandyu@gmail.com. That's the email. And please don't forget to subscribe and download the podcast so you don't miss out on any of this life-transforming information. Tune in to our next episode as Michelle and Jennifer continue guiding you to discover your own light and give you the tools on your path to a more fulfilling life.